Hi, everyone. This is John Jeffrey, CEO of Callahan Associates. I'm joined again with my colleague, Jay Johnson, Chief Collaboration Officer here at Callahan. Hey, Jay.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good. Hey, well, we're here doing our second version of Strategy Brief, opportunity where we thought we could talk to the market a little about some of the things that we're seeing and hearing from credit unions and really influencing how they might talk to their teams and their boards about strategy given these uncertain times. So, Jay, you and I were working on a project earlier this week, and we thought that some of that may be interesting to share and bring some context for credit unions talking to their board and their management team and other stakeholders about this. So maybe I could give a little bit of context about what we were doing and what we saw that got us to think, and maybe we can reflect a little bit together on what that might mean for credit unions.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the context, we just saw the first quarter numbers and our Trend Watch call, so it brings this topic to light, I think.
So, Jay, the video we saw was an interview that Doug McMillon gave with Jim Cramer on CNBC. Doug is the CEO of Walmart, and the time frame of this was October of 2015. Doug became CEO of Walmart in 2014, so about 15 months after he took over CEO, he went on Jim Cramer's Mad Money show. And earlier in the day, Doug McMillon had spent his day talking with Wall Street analysts, and it didn't go well. The stock was down 10%, and Cramer is all over him about performance and what he's doing as CEO and how he took the street by surprise. And one of the things that he talked about, Jay, and one of the reasons why the stock was down was, if you remember back in 2015, Walmart made some announcements about really investing in their employees. And that added expense was going to bring down their numbers that year, and that sort of took Wall Street by surprise. So, but I think as you talked about that, right, and where we thought this would be really interesting for credit unions today, and some of the lessons learned was, he was talking about how they were going to make investments in consumers today at the same time as investing in e-commerce and becoming digital. Right, and sort of how do you do two things at once? And one of the things we've seen credit unions really struggle with right now is balancing that response to the crisis we're in with thinking about long term and balancing those time horizons. We talked a little bit about it last time we got together in a strategy brief, but Jay, maybe talk a little bit about credit union strategy and using those time horizons and how credit unions might be thinking about investing across different time horizons.
Yeah, John, I think it was interesting because in this case, Doug McMillon talked about that he was trying to change the time horizon that investors thought of Walmart in. Walmart, like a lot of public companies, obviously driven by quarterly earnings. And while credit unions aren't in that boat, certainly I think we see credit unions tend to think year to year. They look at budgets every year, put those together. You certainly have some credit unions that may do 3 or maybe even 5-year looks out as they put together strategic plans. But typically when you're talking with the board, it's kind of year to year. And I think there's a parallel there with what Doug was saying. We talked last time on our first strategy brief about near term, medium term, long term. And I think this environment plays right into how you might shape some of those discussions. Near term, we know we're going to take some hits, so to speak. And I use that term just really, I guess, from an earnings perspective. But the reality is we're taking those hits, quote unquote, because we're investing in our members. And we're preparing our balance sheets and doing as much as we can for members, as you've seen credit unions waive fees, loan deferment, skip-a-pays, et cetera, while also putting aside more in the provision for loan loss, et cetera. That's going to give some near-term pain, and I'm sure most credit unions' financial plans that they went into this year are going to be out the window. Mm-hmm. But I think what will be important here is to think of the long term. We looked at our past decade of credit union success through the 2010s, and we said a lot of that was built on some of what might be considered pain during the Great Recession, when you saw earnings drop, A lot of traditional financial ratios go out the window, and yet, despite that, credit unions had a tremendous 2010 decade of the 2010s, because during that Great Recession, they kept investing in members, and that's really what Doug was trying to do.
Yeah, and Jay, I think that context is helpful, right? And since that interview, Walmart stock has basically doubled,
Right.
even with the latest market challenges. And I think what he was talking about, a lot of his vision was, how do we distinguish ourselves? How do we distinguish ourselves against Target or Amazon or Costco or other retailers? As credit unions look at their strategy, and certainly there's plenty of financial services options, both traditional money center banks, regional banks, community banks, and even some of these online fintechs that are trying to compete for wallet share. How do you think that this environment is helping credit unions think about how they distinguish themselves, and what does that mean for strategy, right? Or how might that influence how credit union talks about strategy in this environment?
Well, I think if we use the Walmart example, Doug McMillon talked about, if we don't have customers, we don't have a business, and that was a big part of his rationale for the investments they were making at the time. You're sitting in front of an Ed Callahan quote, and another one of his quotes that is one of the favorites of mine is just simply follow the member. And I think that is how credit unions distinguish themselves in the market, and that's what makes us unique as cooperatives. As we think about strategically what it means for credit unions to continue to move forward in this environment, the idea of just continuing to focus and doing what's right by members, and obviously employees are a big part of that too, and we're seeing a lot of credit unions take care of employees too as part of this, but that continued focus on members, listening to members. We just had our Trend Watch call, and Doug Fecker from Right Path Credit Union talked about how they were leveraging social media more than they ever have, and that part of that really has helped them navigate or think differently about some maybe initial decisions that they had made as a management team. And once they kind of put it out in the market, they get some feedback from the members that may cause them to adjust some of the decisions they make. That makes them a better credit union. And he talked about some of the great response they've received from members because of that. Frankly, same thing on the employee side. He talked about too, about ways they've continued to invest in employees. But I think that what makes credit unions unique is that ability to focus on members, and going back to the first point, focusing on them over the long term. One of the terms we've used to describe credit unions is slow money. You see stock ownership turnover so quickly nowadays. That's not what credit unions are about. Credit unions are a long-term play, and that should be the focus. That's certainly what they hope for in terms of the investments they make in members, and that's the way members hopefully think of credit unions too. And this environment gives them the opportunity to play up why they're different.
Yeah, Jay, and I think one of the things we're hearing a lot of credit unions think about, talk to the boards about this fall as they get into strategic planning, is that notion of how do we think about investing in employees and members and balancing that with the financials of the credit union. And also the communities we're trying to serve, right? There are all sorts of community organizations that are going to feel similar pain to members and credit unions from funding and donations, et cetera. So, we've heard a lot of executives really struggle with how might we want to keep score differently, right? What does success look like? And, I think one of the challenges we've heard is, how do I bring my board and stakeholders along with me, right? And I think in this example that we were talking about, you had Doug McMillon, CEO of the largest retailer in the world, been CEO for about 15 months, and his stock craters, right? Down 10%. And maybe one of the things, and Kramer started hitting with, is, hey, you didn't bring people along with you, right? You didn't, you shouldn't have taken people by surprise. So, I think one of the things we're hearing a lot of critics talk about, and maybe your perspective on how to do this, is how do leaders think about getting alignment and buy-in and bring their boards and stakeholders along with them as they try and think about other ways of keeping score, other ways that they want to have influence or impact on their communities.
Yeah, John, when we do obviously a lot of credit union planning sessions, and there's in a way a kind of natural tension that arises at a lot of those planning sessions about that balance between we've got financial numbers that we have to meet, and frankly, those are a lot of times driven by the regulatory side. The other side of it is we've got members' needs to meet. We're a cooperative. That's who we're about. And yeah, so how do we balance that? And I think as Doug McMillon talked about how maybe he didn't do as good a job of bringing on some of the analysts and the public about it. I think continuing to remind and talk with the board and almost being just very transparent and open about, hey, we do have a natural tension here that, yes, we want to deliver financial results and continue to be a strong institution. We have to do that on the one hand. But I think one of the questions every credit union can ask is, where does their real strength come from? Is it from the balance sheet, or is it from the members and the relationships we have from them? Because ultimately that's really what's driving those results. But it's very natural, and if boards meet with examiners aren't going to talk about that. So we have heard some good things from NCUA recently. Rodney Hood testifying saying, we're giving direction to our examiners to allow credit unions to be flexible and responsive to members. I hope that stays true. But the point is being sure that we do talk about it. One of the things Doug's talked about in that interview with Kramer was, I didn't quantify it. Well, we're hearing a lot of credit unions talking about different scenarios they're modeling for now. I think just showing the range of potential outcomes to the boards and talking through what those numbers really mean in terms of member impact. Because ultimately, again, those numbers are an outcome of how we serve members, and I think that context is going to be important for everyone to understand.
Yeah, so Jay, the takeaways that you sort of have for credit and planning is there's a temptation to really focus all your efforts on the short term, right? It appears like we're going to have real challenges on the loan portfolio, bringing employees back into the office, right? There's going to be a lot of short-term disruption. There's going to be a lot of temptation to put your resources there, but be sure you're thinking about the medium and long term in your strategic discussion, and having some of your team focus on those longer term things. Second is really clarify, how do we want to compete, right? How do we want to distinguish ourselves in the crowded marketplace? And what's that story we want to tell? And it sounds like the third one is really having clarity and purpose around how are we keeping score, and making sure that all the stakeholders are aware of what score we're trying to keep. But more importantly, I think what you were trying to get at, Jay, was, and you kept talking about the member, why we're doing this, right? What is our purpose, right? And you're keeping that front and center, because if the purpose is there, then how you keep score may be very clear. That's different than ROA and growth and traditional balance sheet metrics. Any other things that you would add for credits to think about in this environment?
Well, I think the other thing I'd reference is just our theme from TrendWatch, which is we're built for this. As you said, as you talk about the scorecard, and there's different components to that, there may be times when parts of that scorecard become more important than other parts of that scorecard. Even though we talk about a balanced scorecard, and the idea is covering all those, now it's a time where you may have to say, look, the financial results are going to be what they are going to be. Obviously we want to come through this. We want a sustainable organization. But times like this, maybe that balance actually tilts more towards what are we doing for our members? Are we being responsive to them? As you said, that's the long-term play. We looked at the numbers through the Great Recession, and we talked about on TrendWatch. We may have a couple of rough years here financially. A lot of credit unions are thinking 2020, 2021, it's going to be tough, and that's probably pretty likely. But again, if you view it as an investment for the long term, I think that's the real key there. And it's just almost a maybe a temporary shift in thinking, although again, that long-term underscored thinking of it's about the members, follow the members is to me the key.
Yeah. So Jay, maybe we'll leave it at that, right? The theme, for a lot of credit discussions is follow the members, right? If you follow the member, good things will happen. So thanks everyone for joining us on our second edition of Callahan Strategy Brief. We believe that right now is the time that credit should be talking about strategy, even if it's in bite-sized pieces or even using different medium. But having conversations and keeping the eye on the short-term, medium-term, long-term is important. And until next time, everyone stay healthy and stay safe. Thanks.